You're walking through a city. 1,000 scents hit your nose. Car exhaust, fresh coffee, someone's perfume, the faint tang of garbage, wet concrete, frying food, the metallic smell of a train passing. You don't think about it. You don't notice most of it. Your brain filters it all out, because if you noticed every smell, you'd be overwhelmed within seconds. But if you were alive 100,000 years ago, your nose was your most important tool. It was more important than your eyes in some ways. It told you where food was. It told you where danger was. It told you who was friend and who was stranger. It told you when someone was sick, when someone was afraid, when someone was ready to mate. Your ancestors lived in a world of smell, and they smelled weird, really weird. By modern standards, they stank. They reeked. They were a walking chemical cloud of sweat, smoke, animal fat, dried blood, fermented plant matter, and whatever they'd rolled in that day. But here's the thing. They didn't care. They had no idea they stank. They had no frame of reference. Smell was just smell. It was information. It was identity. It was survival. And it was the most natural thing in the world. Let's start with the obvious. Ancient humans didn't have soap. They didn't have deodorant. They didn't have showers. They didn't have washing machines. They lived in the same clothes for days, weeks, sometimes months. They slept in animal hides that had never seen a drop of water. They cooked over open fires, and every meal filled their hair and skin with smoke. They handled rotting meat, blood, and guts with their bare hands. They walked through mud, rain, and animal dung without a second thought. They didn't wash their hands after going to the bathroom. They didn't brush their teeth. They didn't have hygiene in any modern sense. By our standards, they were absolutely rank. But that's the point. Their standards were different. Their expectations were different. Their noses were different. The human body produces two types of sweat. The first comes from eccrine glands, the ones all over your body. That sweat is mostly water and salt. It's the cooling sweat. It's what keeps you from overheating when you're running after a deer or walking across the savannah. That sweat doesn't smell like much on its own. The second comes from apocrine glands, concentrated in your armpits and groin. That sweat is different. It's rich in proteins and fats. And when bacteria on your skin break those down, they produce the compounds that we think of as body odor. In a modern world, we mask it. We douse it with antiperspirants and deodorants and perfumes. In the ancient world, it was just part of being alive. It was as natural as breathing. But here's where it gets interesting. Your ancestors weren't just walking around smelling like sweat and smoke. They were actively manipulating their scent. They were perfuming themselves, and they'd been doing it long before civilization. Long before the Egyptians, long before the Greeks, long before anyone had invented the word perfume. Archaeologists have found evidence of scent manipulation going back tens of thousands of years. In a cave in the Caucasus Mountains, researchers uncovered a Neanderthal burial site containing hundreds of flowers. The flowers were placed with the body, suggesting a deliberate effort to scent the dead. This wasn't just about covering up the smell of decay. It was ritual. It was meaning. It was an early form of perfume. The Neanderthals weren't just burying their dead. They were honoring them. They were sending them off with fragrance. But the evidence doesn't stop there. In a cave in Iraq, archaeologists found a Neanderthal grave with pollen from multiple species of flowers, including yarrow, bachelor's button, and grape hyacinth. These weren't growing in the cave. They were brought in, deliberately. Some of them were medicinal. Some of them were fragrant. The Neanderthals were doing something with scent that went beyond mere practicality. They were using it to communicate. They were using it to connect with something larger than themselves. And they weren't alone. Early modern humans were doing the same thing. They were using plants for scent long before the first perfumeries. They burned aromatic woods. They crushed fragrant leaves into their hair and clothing. They coated themselves in animal fat mixed with crushed herbs and flowers. It wasn't just about smelling good. It was about identity. It was about signaling who you were and what group you belonged to. It was about making a statement without saying a word. Because smell is personal. It's intimate. It's something you can't fake. In a world without language as we know it, scent was communication. Your body odor carried information about your diet, your health, your stress levels, even your emotional state. Studies on modern hunter-gatherers show that they can identify individuals by smell alone. They can tell if someone is related to them. They can tell if someone is sick. They can tell if someone is afraid. They can tell if someone is ovulating. They can tell if someone has eaten meat recently. This is not a cultural quirk. This is biology. The human nose is more powerful than you think. But here's the twist. Ancient humans didn't just use scent to communicate with each other. They used it to communicate with the supernatural. They used it to connect with the spirit world. In many cultures, smoke was seen as a messenger between the living and the dead. The word perfume comes from the Latin perfumum, through smoke. The first perfumes were offerings to the gods. The ancient Egyptians used incense to honor the dead. The Greeks and Romans used it in temples, but the practice goes back much further. It goes back to the first time a human threw a handful of aromatic leaves onto a fire and watched the smoke rise. It goes back to the first time someone realized that burning something fragrant made the world feel different. And then there's the question of how they smelled to each other. This is where it gets really strange. You might think they would have found each other repulsive, but they didn't, because they were used to it. Their brains were wired differently. They could distinguish individual scents the way we distinguish faces. They could tell who had been where. They could track each other by smell. In a world without writing, scent was a form of record-keeping. It was a way of knowing without asking. It was a way of understanding without words. There's also the practical side. Scent was used to mask human odor during hunts. If you're trying to sneak up on an animal, the last thing you want is for it to catch your scent. So you rub yourself with mud, with herbs, with smoke. You change your smell to become invisible. It's the first camouflage. It's the first stealth technology. And it worked. It worked for hundreds of thousands of years. It's still used by some hunter-gatherer groups today. In 2010, researchers from the University of Glasgow analyzed residues from ancient pottery found in Europe. They found traces of fatty acids, beeswax, and plant oils. They weren't just cooking. They were making creams, lotions, and ointments. They were caring for their skin. They were scenting themselves. This wasn't vanity. This was health. It was protection against the elements. It was social signaling. It was ritual. It was everything. And then there's the question of what they smelled like in the end. When they died, they didn't just rot. Their bodies were treated. They were wrapped. They were laid on beds of flowers. They were smoked. They were perfumed. Death was a transition, and scent was part of the transition. It was a way of honoring the dead. It was a way of helping them pass into the next world. It was a way of saying goodbye. So what did ancient humans actually smell like? Imagine a person who hasn't bathed in a month. Add the scent of wood smoke, which has been absorbed into their hair and skin and clothing. Add the smell of animal fat, which they use to protect their skin from the cold and wind. Add the smell of dried blood from butchering game. Add the smell of crushed herbs, which they rub into their skin for medicinal and ritual purposes. Add the smell of fermentation from plant matter that started to break down. Add the smell of wet earth from sleeping on the ground. Add the smell of leather and hide from their clothes and shoes. Add the smell of their own unique body chemistry, which carries information about their diet, their health, and their genetic makeup. Now multiply that by a camp of 30 people, all living in close quarters, all breathing the same air, all sharing the same environment. That's what the ancient world smelled like. It's almost impossible to imagine. We don't have the sensory capacity. Our noses have been dulled by centuries of artificial scents and sterile environments.
But here's the thing that makes this truly fascinating. Your ancestors didn't think they smelled bad. They didn't have a concept of bad smell in the way we do.
They had categories for smells: good, bad, dangerous, comforting, familiar, foreign. But bad didn't mean, I need to shower. It meant something is wrong. A bad smell was a warning. A good smell was a reassurance. And the smell of their own camp, the smell of their own family, the smell of their own bodies, that was good. That was home. And then everything changed. When humans started living in cities, the relationship with smell shifted. When we started wearing more clothes, when we started using more fire, when we started living in enclosed spaces, the smellscape changed. We started masking our natural scent. We started trying to control it. We started trying to eliminate it. We invented soap. We invented deodorant. We invented perfume. We created an entire industry around making ourselves smell like something else, something other than what we were. And somewhere along the way, we lost something. We lost the ability to read each other by scent. We lost the intimacy of sharing a space with someone and knowing them by their smell. We lost a whole dimension of human communication. But it's still there, buried in your brain, underneath layers of civilization and culture and habit. There's a part of you that can still do it. You can still smell fear on someone. You just don't realize it. You can still tell when someone is sick. You just think you're imagining it. You can still feel drawn to someone because of their scent. You just call it chemistry. So the next time you wear perfume, remember, you're not doing anything new. You're doing something ancient. You're following a tradition that goes back hundreds of thousands of years. You're connecting with a time when smell was survival, identity, ritual, and memory all rolled into one. And you're smelling exactly how your ancestors smelled. They didn't stink. They smelled like themselves. They smelled like the world they lived in. They smelled like the air they breathed. They smelled like home.